Okay, well, it's 10:32, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for joining this week's webinar. So I'm Allison from Envision Consulting, and we are a nonprofit consulting firm working with nonprofits on search and strategy. And so during this time, we wanted to help nonprofits and give back the best that we can. So today we're going to address some of the questions that we get asked most often, which we are not experts on, so we brought in experts. So today we're talking about the federal bills and how they affect nonprofits. So thanks, Katrina, for talking to us about that. We'll also be talking about employment law. So we brought in Kristina from Landegger. Thanks, Kristina, for talking about that. And then you're all curious about how you need to communicate with your donors right now. And so thanks, Julie Lacouture, for coming in and talking about that. For any of you that have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. We'll try to get to them and redirect and get those questions answered. But if you could, we'll save the questions until the end of the presentations so that we have time to get through everything. Also, if you have any good recommendations for what I should watch next on Netflix, I finished Tiger King. So if you have any other good recommendations, I'd love to hear it. All right, thanks. So I'll turn it over to you, Katrina. Oh, we can unmute her.
Okay, all right. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. Okay. My name is Katrina Soelter. I'm the Director of Wealth Management with KCS Wealth Advisory. We're an independent RIA that serves the greater Los Angeles area and some clients in the greater United States. We focus on rigorous financial planning and investment management for families and their businesses. We're going to get through as much information as we can in the time we have available. But since there are a lot of different pieces to this, I'm going to limit my comments and try to be as succinct as possible. There are a lot of pieces of this we still don't know. So caveat is that we're still getting more and more information as the federal government releases it. Okay, so let's go through from a cash flow perspective. We're going to cover cash flow and financial scenarios. So let's talk a little bit about the cash flow piece first and foremost. For nonprofits and small businesses, there are several programs available. The federal government released through the CARES Act the EIDL, which is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. Both of those have been funded substantially through the CARES Act that was passed through Congress on Friday of last week. There's also the Families First Act, which talks about paid sick leave and family leave tax credits to cover the cost of those expanded family and sick leave policies. And that was passed a couple of weeks ago. That's from the federal government. On the state side, there are several different programs available. The work sharing program through the state of California, which allows you to reduce your workforce by up to 60% in terms of their hours, and the state picks up via the unemployment insurance that tab. So you've kind of got a work sharing, meaning basically cost sharing program through the state of California. There is a comprehensive list on their website, which is on our resources list, which is a few slides in. We'll get there in a second. And the state does have a really great guide to what's available from an employer perspective. There's also several different guides that are listing the differences for employers versus employees from the state as well. The local side of things from the city of Los Angeles, for those of you who are here in LA, there is an emergency bill that the city of Los Angeles passed, including some microloans of between $5,000 and $20,000, up to $11 million. And so there are some options there from the city of Los Angeles. And then there are a lot of private funds. There's Facebook has got a whole bunch of grants that they're releasing. And so there are some items there. And then there are a variety of additional private funds that are available. So depending on your particular area of expertise and what you work with, we really recommend doing some Google searches to find out which private funds are available, because more and more companies and individuals are releasing funding for those that have been impacted and whose businesses have been impacted. Just as an example, there are a variety of funds available for musicians and entertainment type folks, people who run events, So there are lots of different funding options available from a private sector as well. And like I said, I'm going to try to keep this as short as possible. So I'm going to go into next, let's go into the federal programs and dive a little bit deeper on the EIDL versus the PPP. So this is a lovely chart. Thank you, Vixel Exchange Group and Sebastian DeVivo for this lovely comparison. Some of this has already changed in the last literally 12 hours. So let's go through the EIDL very, very briefly. The EIDL is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. This one is available via the SBA's website. Their application process has been open since Monday. They updated it and it's now streamlined. There is a $10,000 grant piece that is available through the EIDL, and it's basically an advance of the loan that can be forgiven, and that's basically a grant to your program. That is processed directly from the SBA, from the Small Business Administration. The terms for that we, as we know them right now, are 3.75% interest rate over 30 years with no payment for 12 months. There right now is a personal guarantee on that side of things, and they do have some criteria with regard to credit scores and looking at your revenue. It's up. That one is a slightly less popular, the newly released PPP. The Paycheck Protection Program. And so if you haven't seen that yet, you can go ahead and log on to the different websites that are providing that. And those are through the SBA lenders. So if you have a bank that is already your business banking partner, we recommend that you reach out to them specifically. The application, like I said, is up right now. You can fill it out via a PDF. That particular application is then having to go through your lenders and to the bank specifically. The issue with this particular program is that it is most likely going to be very impacted because everybody is looking for this particular loan since it is a forgivable loan. There are a few caveats here. First of all, the interest rate that we are finding out right now looks like it will be 0.5%. And rather than being over 10 years, the most recent information they released yesterday will be over 2 years instead of over 10 years. And then the other piece of this is that it is up to $10 million instead of $2 million like the EIDL. In terms of which bank you should be able to reach out to, we definitely recommend your current business banking lender if you have one. If you don't, we actually do have up on our website on kcswealth.com in our resources guide, there's a list, we found a list, thank gosh, of lenders that are currently approved through the SBA. And so you can go there to see if there are some banks that you know of or potentially have a relationship with to find somebody you can speak to about turning this in. Like I said, the application deadline applications open for submission on Friday, April 3rd. That is for businesses, nonprofits, those types of folks. For self-employed or independent contractors, they are also eligible for this Paycheck Protection Program loan. And that PPP piece for self-employed and independent contractors is not, that application, they're not accepting it for those people until April 10th, which is next week. So just a little bit of detail there. That particular instrument, because it is partly forgivable, we do encourage you to take a look at what the criteria are for the forgiveness. There's a wonderful guide through the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is on our resource list in a couple of slides, that walks you through what the forgiveness implications are and exactly how to calculate that. Based on the criteria they released yesterday, they are letting people know that they're most likely looking for 75% of that loan to be used towards payroll and 25% to be used towards rent, utilities, mortgage, etc. previous information we had was that you might be able to use it towards health insurance or other types of insurance through the business and those costs as well. That does not seem to be part of the criteria yet on the most recent release from last night, but we are going to be keeping up on that information. If you don't mind going to the next slide, please. Okay, so you can apply for both. What we do know, you can apply for both an EIDL and PPP loan, but you can't use them for the same expenses. So you can't cover the same payroll costs with those two loans together. We definitely recommend that you get that PPP loan application filled out as quickly as possible so that you're prepared for the submission opening on Friday, and find your resource now. They are unfortunately saying that this could be an impacted program and that there is a cap based on the most recent stimulus bill that was released on Friday with the information from Friday. So they are saying that you should try to get it in as quickly as possible, since they will be processing it as on a rolling basis as they receive them. The other thing we are hearing from certain banking contacts is that those SBA-approved lender banks are probably going to prioritize their existing banking clients, and they are each looking to, the banks are going to approve the loans and then look to get reimbursed from the federal government. So there's going to be a little bit of frustration, I think, as we wait for all of this to get clarity and get some clarity around that. You are going to need quite a lot of paperwork. Get your profit and loss statement ready. Be clear about your payroll expenses. Have documentation for the last 12 months. Get a clear accounting of all of your costs. Your Form 990, if you're a nonprofit, you definitely want to include that information and have that ready to go, and that's through the SBA's website as well. Okay, next slide. What we don't know. We aren't really clear if you can hire your staff for the duration of that paycheck protection loan, let them go afterwards and still get the forgiveness. There's no guidelines about that. We don't know how quickly you will get the funds from the loans. We don't know if the programs are going to be extended or what that cap is going to look like on the top side, if they're going to extend how much they're providing through this particular program. We don't know what some of the pieces of the forgiveness process and what items and documentation you will need will look like. And we don't know when we will get more information and clarity. So we are urging some patience and just having all of your ducks in a row and controlling what you can control during this process, which is being in touch with your contacts, having somewhere to submit that application, and having all of your documentation prepared so that you're ready to go, whatever you might need. Next slide, please. This is a very lengthy list of resources. A few notes here. I've listed a lot of those different resources on the first top bullet points. If you want our full resource list on our website, that is at the bottom. It's on kcswealth.com under our Insights tab, and then there's a post titled Resources for You and Your Family and Your Business During Coronavirus. We are hosting a small business resources webinar tomorrow from 11 a.m. to noon, and we're going to dive deeper into each of these programs, deeper into that paycheck protection program, deeper into each of the state programs and local programs as well. So if you're looking for some more information on the resources that I just shared, or some more detail on any of this, please feel free to sign up for our webinar. That's on kcswealth.com under our events tab. And right there's the registration for our webinar. And I think, Allison, that takes me to my time here. If we wanted to kind of open it up for questions, and maybe we can do that through the chat box as well.
Sure. So does anybody have questions for Katrina on the EIDL or PPP loans?
I think I'm seeing some in the chat box regarding what is available from the presentation. Yes, I think there is going to be a presentation sent out afterwards. Is that correct, Allison?
That's correct.
Awesome. And if your bank is not a participant for the PPP, I do recommend on our website, that resources list, we have a link for a lengthy PDF of listing all of the banks as we know them who are approved through the SBA. Other banks are going to continue to be approved, we believe, but the problem is that there's a 3 to 4 week lag time for banks to get approved through this lending program. So we do recommend trying to reach out to somebody immediately who is already approved to try to get qualifications for that. Specifics about the 10,000 of EIDL being a grant. On that piece of it, what we're seeing on that EIDL application link through the Small Business Administration's website, there's a place where you check off to get that $10,000 advance. Whether or not you are approved for the EIDL based on your credit score and collateral, et cetera, you still can get that $10,000 advance, and it is a grant. So that's definitely something that you can look into and potentially take advantage of. Okay, and then let's see. I think I
Katrina,
mentioned on the case. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Any guidance on what nonprofits are eligible for these programs?
Yeah, so nonprofits are eligible. If you're 501c3, you can go ahead and apply for the EIDL. You can apply for the PPP. There's a very specific checkbox on the Paycheck Protection Program application for nonprofits, as well as on the EIDL application as well. So all of this is applicable to nonprofits as well.
And then what about if you've already taken action with your employees? What about if you've already done furloughs or layoffs, cut hours?
Yeah.
Out of luck? Or?
No, you can actually hire people back via the under that PPP program and still qualify, because part of it is rehiring those folks. And there's a little bit of a confusion, I think, about this, about whether what's best for you and for your company, whether you should go ahead and lay people off and let them claim through unemployment through the state of California, or whether you should hire them back and cover their payroll. And I really do think, unfortunately, that's on a case-by-case basis. And we recommend that each business take a look at their own particular plan. And that's where these financial scenarios come into play, where you can run through best case, worst case, and sort of middle of the ground case to figure out what's most applicable to your particular company.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Yeah.
So are there restrictions for religious organization nonprofits? Do you know?
To my knowledge, there aren't. There as long as you're not engaging in illegal activity, you're pretty much on the up and up. There is some qualification metrics, and so we do recommend taking a look at that specific for the EIDL. The PPP does not seem to have any such thing. The EIDL does have a little bit of a list at the end of the application, so you just want to double check on there how your specific organization gets qualified.
Thank you. So there's just a couple questions about only having 20 employees. Is there a minimum on how many employees you have to apply for this?
Absolutely not, as long as you're under 500. So if you have only 20, no problem. If you have 5, no problem. If you're self-employed or an independent contractor, even then you can qualify, but you do have that April 10th deadline for the particular PPP program.
And then what about part-timers? Do part-timers also qualify?
Yep, it's full-time and part-time. So as long as your staff was on payroll, then and you want to take a look at that, it's 2.5 times your monthly payroll is what the loan amount is going to be under that PPP. So you want to have your payroll numbers up and ready to go so that you can qualify for the correct loan amount. And that's what that documentation is going to be necessary for, so that you get the correct loan amount.
Great. So I see a few more questions about the WorkShare program. Unless you have information on that, Katrina, can I shift that to Kristina?
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
All right. Thanks so much, Katrina. That's amazing information. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Again, we're definitely sharing the slides, all the resources, the links to Katrina's site. Don't worry if you weren't quick enough to write it down, we'll send it out. Moving on to talk a little bit about the personnel issues and the impact of the CARES Act. So now we're looking at things like unemployment and hopefully some of that WorkShare program, because I know we all have a lot of questions. I'll let Kristina take over from Landegger.
Good morning, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, excellent. So Katrina, that presentation was very helpful. I know I have a lot of clients who are going to take advantage of that information. So just to fill in the gaps just a little bit, I want to just go through, and Katrina did a really great overview of kind of the multi-level things that are being provided to us. On the federal level, we've got the Families First, FFCRA, that provides for an expanded FMLA as well as an emergency paid sick leave. And we can go over to the next slide, please. And I'll be zipping through some of these because of the limited time, but also I want to make sure that I fill in the gaps and answer questions, because I know there are going to be lots of questions. So in terms of what we are dealing with is, as Katrina mentioned, on the federal side, we've got the Families First, which the intention is to expand the FMLA to make it applicable to employers who are much smaller, including employers under, who have less than 50 employees. And we can go to the next slide. The Families First also provides emergency paid sick leave that, today, April 1st is the first day that, your employees can actually ask for all these things. So you want to make sure you guys are providing notice. And since many of our employees are teleworking, the notice can be sent by email or it can be posted on your website. The key thing here is that you definitely provide the notice to your employees and, to make sure that they understand what the rights are, especially now that a lot of us are going to be laying off employees. We want to make sure they do understand their rights and don't come back and say, we had no idea what the new law was. We had no idea what was available to us. So make sure that you provide the notice, and if you have questions, I can address them later. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So there are very specific reasons that an employee can request to take the emergency paid sick leave. The 6 reasons are listed here, and you'll get a copy of these slides so that you'll know. One of the things that the Department of Labor has clarified is that the paid sick leave isn't automatically given for someone who is staying at home to, for example, for preventative care reasons. Like, a lot of employees are saying, hey, I'm too scared to come into work. Can I just work from home or can I just stay home? Under the guidance that we've been provided by the Department of Labor, someone who is staying at home without, who is asymptomatic isn't automatically, in the category of number 1 and number 2. So in other words, they aren't quarantined or in isolation. And next slide, please. Unless they are, compelled by a government entity to remain at home, either because they are known to be sick or suspected to be sick, right? So I think a lot of our clients are confused about this because they're saying, wait a minute, there's a stay-at-home, shelter-in-place, safer-at-home mandate. Does that mean that everyone who is staying at home automatically qualifies for the paid sick leave? And I want to make sure that you understand that they are not. Right, because of the DOL guidance, those individuals have to be exhibiting symptoms or suspecting to be sick with the coronavirus. Next slide, please. So one of the things that a lot of companies are going to be eligible for is what's called the small business exemption that will apply across the board to businesses, nonprofits, whatnot. And there are 3 reasons that you can qualify for it. And I'm sorry, let me clarify that. There's only one reason you can qualify for it. There are 3 3 criteria, one of which, if you do have one of these, then you will qualify for the exemption. So generally speaking, you can invoke this exemption if your business will be jeopardized because of, for example, the expenses and the financial obligations would exceed the available business revenue. If an employee is a manager, supervisor, or an essential employee, and their absence would put a strain on your operations, and or you have insufficient workforce to replace that employee who is seeking leave. So any one of these 3 reasons would be sufficient for you to say, I'm a small business under 50 employees, including nonprofit, and I qualify for this, okay? The way that, next slide, please, we recommend at this time that you document it by, simply doing an interoffice memo that states, an individual who is authorized to make business decisions has made the determination that one of these three things actually apply to you. Okay, so what about businesses who are bigger, right? Because a lot of businesses are going to also now be required to provide these expanded benefits, including the expanded FMLA and the emergency paid sick leave. These are businesses with fewer than 500 employees. These are some of the bullet points to understand who counts in terms of who your quote unquote employee is. And let's go to the next slide so I cover the rest of the presentation. If you're in the healthcare industry, or contract with anyone who's in the healthcare industry. I have a lot of clients who are nonprofits who are in this bucket. Make sure that you can look at this and avail yourself to the exemption, the healthcare provider exclusion, and the DOL just over the weekend provided a little more information about this. And it's very broad, so you may actually be able to take advantage of it. If you have any questions, please ask. Next slide. So these are some of the wage considerations, and I know that during Katrina's presentation, some of these were mentioned. So a lot of my clients are considering layoffs because of the hardship that they're facing. Any employee that is being laid off or furloughed or terminated, and the term termination has been interpreted by the Department of the DLSC to include any furlough or temporary layoff that does not specify a return to work date that's within the same pay period. So if you're laying off, if you're furloughing your employees and your notice of change of relationship status to that employee does not have a return to work date that's within the same pay period, whether they're exempt or non-exempt, then you have arguably terminated them for the purposes of that definition. And as a result, I want to make sure that you consider any potential WARN notice issues and any potential Labor Code 201 and 203 violations. What is Labor Code 201? Just as a brief overview, it triggers your obligation upon termination to pay out final wages and any accrued leave, including vacation or PTO. Paid sick leave isn't one of those things that you are obligated to pay out upon a termination or severance from payroll. And Labor Code 203 simply provides for penalties for anyone who fails to, make those payments in a timely fashion, and it allows an employee to basically seek penalties for up to 30 days of regular pay. So it can get expensive. Next slide, please. In terms of the potential California WARN issues, I want you to just be aware that, luckily the governor has actually suspended that 60-day notice requirement. So if you're an employer who has employed 75 plus employees, and you have either laid off employees or you've shut down completely, then you would arguably be required to provide what's called a WARN notice. Okay, that 60-day notice requirement has been temporarily suspended because of what we're facing. However, you are still required to provide notice. And if you have any questions, let me know. Next slide, please. So I'm sorry, that must have been very confusing. You are still required to provide a written form that says, hey, here's my notice, and I gave it to you as early as I could. However, you are no longer required to, have that 60-day notice, advance notice period. So that exemption is very helpful for most of our clients. Okay, so the CARES Act, and I know that Katrina went into it, so I'm just going to kind of like fill in the gaps real quickly. What does it mean in the employment context? The CARES basically expands the definition of eligible employees to include individuals who were rehired by the employer. Okay, so that's all that it really supplements. So in other words, let's say you were laid off or furloughed on or after March 1st. You qualify for everything else under the Families First. In other words, you are an employee who has worked for at least 30 days and prior to being laid off. but you now also can be an employee who was rehired by the employer. So whether you've been laid off or rehired, you now qualify for these benefits that are available under the CARES Act. And Katrina covered the tax credits. So next slide, please. Okay, Katrina covered the Paycheck Protection Program, and she is the expert on this, so I'd go to her. So next slide, please. And the lending to small businesses, we can skip that as well. Okay, let me just cover frequently asked questions. So a lot of my clients come to me and say, hey, you know what do I do with an employee who doesn't want to come into work because of concerns for contracting COVID-19? So first of all, this is not an absence requiring the emergency paid sick leave, right? Remember how I provided the 6 reasons? Fear of contracting COVID isn't one of those 6 reasons. Nonetheless, what I do still advise is if you're an employer who, is trying to kind of accommodate your employee, you can actually decide to allow that individual to either access their other accrued sick leave or PTO policy or anything else, including vacation, if you want. But if you don't want, for example, you want to just send them home and they are unable to telecommute, you can put them on unpaid leave, which is completely fine and legal. But I'd still kind of, some employees will come back and say, I have depression, I have anxiety, I have some sort of a disorder that makes my fear of contracting COVID-19, a medical condition or a disability. Make sure that you analyze those things on a case-by-case basis, and definitely get some sort of a note from their provider. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the other questions is, can an employer send home an employee who has symptoms? Absolutely. And, just want to reiterate, I apologize for any background noise here. Any symptoms under COVID have not been defined as a quote unquote disability. And so there's really no disability related action here. It's permitted for you under the ADA to say, I'm sending you home. I don't have to do anything else, right? Now, the CDC advises that employees who are experiencing, acute respiratory illness and have a fever of over 100.4 should stay home. So feel free to tell your employee, go ahead and stay home, and I think in most instances, the employee will understand and even prefer to stay home. You can go ahead and talk about maybe formulating a policy that's related to COVID-19. I know a lot of my clients have put something together, or you can just go ahead and, play it by ear and tell them verbally, this is what you want to do. Next slide, please. And one other question is, may an employer require an employee to work from home when the individual has been in close contact with someone? Yes, in fact, many of my clients, if not most of them, have a policy or sent out an email that's a little more informal that basically says, if you've been in close contact with someone with COVID, or if you think you've been exposed, please, first of all, let us know right away. And even if you're not experiencing any symptoms at all, we want to make sure and be watchful of the situation. And what the CDC advises is that that employee may actually be excluded from the workplace if they, next slide, exhibit any of the following symptoms, or I'm sorry, any of the following reasons: they've been in close contact with, or, flew on an airplane within 6 feet of, which is inevitable if you're on an airplane, live in the same household, or experiencing symptoms after being laboratory confirmed with COVID-19. So that's that. Next slide, please. I know that Katrina covered briefly last week the city council of Los Angeles had an emergency meeting. They ended up actually passing the COVID-19 related paid leave. What this city of LA paid sick leave ordinance is actually intended to supplement the gap between Families First, which is the federal act that was passed, right? The federal act basically says, hey, we are expanding this to apply to employees who are under 500 employees, including under 50, right? This local ordinance is actually intended to bridge that gap between those, the federal act and any employees who have over 500 employees. So it says, hey, we haven't left you out. If you're an employer who has over 500 employees, and the way that it's counted is nationwide. So if you have any employees who are overseas, those don't count. But it is intended to fill that gap, and the ordinance will not apply to any businesses that have closed due to COVID-19 civil authority. So in other words, I think it's treating those individuals, and again, we don't know for sure, as Katrina mentioned, there are a lot of unanswered questions, but I think there's been an across-the-board treatment of individuals who have either been sent home without pay, or there's a shutdown, furlough, layoff that has no definite return date within the pay period. All of these individuals are no longer your quote-unquote employees. And if that is the case, they are not entitled to any of the benefits under, any of these federal, state, or local provisions. And I think that may be it. Let's see what the next slide is. I think that's the end of it. Yeah, that's it. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them at this time. And if not, I'm also happy to receive emails at a later date.
Thank you so much, Kristina. This
Absolutely.
And
And
really
this,
informative.
I'm happy to help, and this PowerPoint will be available to you guys, to use at a later time.
So we got a few questions about the work share program. Do you have any information on if that is in force or what's going on?
Yeah, it is in full force and effect. What it is, and I want to kind of like briefly distinguish it from, kind of a normal unemployment insurance program. So WorkShare is something that an employer has to actually apply for, okay? And it is covered by the employer, okay? And what it is it's the employer's desire to supplement, to bridge that gap between, let's say, it only applies, first of all, to a situation where the employer has reduced your hours. So it does not apply in a situation where the employer has laid you off. The work share is, as the kind of title suggests, is intended to, put that obligation on the employer to share the responsibility for, bridging that, the payment, the wages gap that has now resulted as a result of COVID. So let's say you have reduced your salary or hourly by 25%, right? And in other words, your employees are now working less hours, you're paying them less, and you can now apply with the state for a program that allows you to share in that responsibility for bridging the gap. And there are certain requirements that you have to meet that, I'm happy to kind of provide more details, but the concept is that you are engaging in this program and the employees are now having additional income to supplement the gap as a result of the reduction in the hours that they're experiencing.
Thank you. I know that, I've gotten a few questions about them not responding or that their phone calls aren't going through.
The EDD has been the EDD is the provider for the unemployment insurance programs as well as the work share. They are inundated. I know that in the last 3 weeks, they had to literally overhaul their internal systems. They've had to expand their ability to even sustain the amount of traffic their website has been experiencing. So definitely try to, go through and apply, do the paperwork. It's not actually that bad. So put together a plan that you think works for you if you're interested in the WorkShare program. I'm also happy to provide more information offline. I know our time is limited, but I know that it is very beneficial for both sides, especially if you have employees you really want to keep on and you want to make sure that they're happy and they come back.
Thank you. This is so much, so informative, and really, really appreciate it. So thank you, Kristina. So you'll definitely have Kristina's information. We'll also send out Katrina's information. So they're both amazing resources, as you can tell. So shifting a little bit, we've gotten a lot of questions about, okay, we've kind of figured out our back of house. How are we talking to donors? How are we communicating with external audiences? And Julie is amazing at that. So thank you so much. We're having Julie Lacouture from Goodways. Julie?
Hi.
Hi.
So we'll shift gears a bit, right?
Right. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. So what I want to give you in this brief section is just a couple of different frameworks for organizing your donor communications. You know, in fundraising, we like to say once you've met one donor, you've met one donor, because they all work differently and they all have different opinions, and the relationship can be different at every organization. So the thing that I see happening right now is that a lot of people are getting a lot of different information on what to do about fundraising. And it can be a little bit about, you know, like follow the bright, shiny lights. I just want to give you a couple of frameworks. So the first framework I'll give you is the key to great donor communications, right? And this works all year round. And so that this means these are just things to like check boxes for your messaging. So when we look at messages that have emotion, that show a clear impact, that exude trustworthiness, and then are urgent sounding, and I put urgent in quotes, which I'll explain in a second, these types of communications tend to do best. So when we talk about emotion, we're talking about connecting with the donor. So do they feel strongly about making a difference, and are they moved to help? Clear impact, thinking about how the donor sees their ability to make a difference with you. Trustworthiness is about, a lot of times comes down to, is everything spelled right? Does it sound good? Do you feel like an organization that you can trust with your money? And then urgency is not necessarily our traditional definition of the word urgent, like we need to raise money now or we're going to close our doors tomorrow, but more about, is this important? Is this one of the issues that I feel like as a donor is important right now? So in the times that we are in this moment, all of this is changing rapidly. So for a lot of different organizations, we can get at the urgency message really quickly because of what's going on, because we're all feeling it. But where we may be missing messages right now are around the impact. Like, why does your organization need funding right now? I'm going to pause here for a second and say that I'm going to be talking about individual donor communications, and I have one piece of advice for if you have institutional funders. Most foundations that are supporting organizations have been really good and really proactive right now about saying, if you have a current grant with us, call us and we can talk about negotiating the terms of that grant. And I think there's two asks you want to think about making to your institutional funders if you need to make changes right now. One is called a no-cost transfer, where you would say, you know, the project that we're working on with these funds is now on hold and it's gonna take us a little bit longer. Do we have permission to like not finish it on the timeline that we thought, but transfer it to the next fiscal year? Another request you can make of your institutional funders is, can we move this grant to be a general operating grant? And a lot of funders have been really, really nice and really, really understanding about those and saying yes to it. So those are my two keys there. So we're going to move on to the next slide. So I think that when thinking about your communications and your fundraising, you have to think about which boat are you in right now. So there's some organizations that are providing critical frontline services. So we think of like the food banks and the hospitals, but we also think of maybe the education organizations who are saying like kids still need to learn, and all of the safety net kind of services are in there. The middle group there, the pink boat, pivoting. So organizations that are saying, you know, we usually provide this service, and now because of this health crisis, we're seeing more needs from our community. So here you might see things from, like, I was talking to someone who runs an LGBTQ center. So saying, you know, this has put our population in a different risk category in a lot of ways, because we've had to suspend testing. And also we have youth that we work with that are not quite safer at home. It's not quite a friendly place to them. So we're having to add services. In this category, we also see organizations that are having to change service delivery and moving stuff to online. And then in the last category, we're seeing organizations that are just kind of paused. So this might be museums or zoos or places where you have to go to be, but they're just not able to provide services right now. So depending on what boat you're in, I'm going to give you a couple pieces of advice. So we'll go to the next slide. So if you're providing critical frontline services and you go for it, fundraise right now. Just keep in mind, it's taking longer to get people's attention. So you have to ask for support in small bites. And remember that your donors are receiving an email from every single company they've ever been on their list for. And also probably very personally scared and dealing with their own changes in their own lives. So short emails, short stories, social media posts that kind of indicate that their help is welcome, and donation forms that are short and to the point. All of this stuff, smaller messaging spread out over a longer period of time, works better right now, especially. The other thing you want to do is give people additional ways to help and to share. Right now, there's a bunch of different groups of people that are in how people are feeling. So some people are dealing with having to work from home and be a primary caregiver and be a school teacher and are just totally overwhelmed. There's another group of people that are sidelined. They're at their house and they have so much free time. They want to do additional things. So if you can build in virtual volunteering or anything that would actually help your organization, that's a great way to get people involved as well. For organizations providing critical frontline services, I would say your best bet on communications is continuously update doing to respond to this crisis, and always include your donate button on every message. Be honest, be transparent, and the thing we're saying to these organizations is send the message when you have something to say. Don't worry too much about what we would usually call cadence of like send the email here and then send it, make sure you wait this many days. If you're providing critical frontline services, give the updates when they're available. Let's go to the next slide. So if you're pivoting and responding to emerging needs and kind of identifying these opportunities, you're in a different boat here. So you might have to be communicating to people when they're ready to think beyond their own crisis mode. And what you're doing here is you're really telling your story, saying, here's something we're all experiencing, but maybe what you haven't thought about is how this affects, for example, people living in abusive relationships. And here's what we're doing to help. And I think it's the same advice to kind of put it into bite-sized chunks, but you're doing a lot more storytelling and maybe some more soft asks. So your job is to catch people when they're ready to think beyond crisis mode. And a tactic for doing this is to tell those storytelling emails and then watch who's opening and clicking through and maybe following up with them with asks, not necessarily doing your whole list. Again, you want to stay authentic and stay honest and keep your community up to date. That's where social media can be really helpful in telling these little stories. Understand though, and this is good advice for everyone, that your audience is probably not likely ready to think too far in advance. So, and sorry for my typo, but your audience maybe isn't ready for the messaging yet of, we think we're going to have financial trouble in September. They might not be there yet. So that messaging is a little harder to do at this point, if that makes sense. We can go to the next slide. For organizations that are waiting to return to normal services, you might be feeling like, okay, we're waiting, and boy, I think we're going to have trouble fundraising in a couple of months. That's not necessarily going to be super resonant to your donor community right now, unless you have relationships with them. So for organizations like this, it's important to get on the phone with your donors, think about how you can be in service to your donor community. Remember, your donors might be scared, alone, and hurting too. Here's where you can start thinking about the assets that you have, the services, the curricula, the opportunities to be involved, and how that might be helpful. Organizations here might partner with different organizations that are offering critical services. So we've seen a couple of organizations say, you know, we don't have anything except space, but we're going to make our space available to be food distribution centers. That's not usually what we offer, but we're going to be involved in that way. So they're kind of taking themselves from this blue boat and moving themselves into that pivoting area. For organizations here, just to continue my boat and sea metaphor throughout the whole thing, when fishermen can't go to sea, they mend their nets. This is a really great time to be looking at your donor list, checking in with donors, maybe organizing some database kind of stuff, and getting soft messages out there about support and partnering with other organizations. We'll go to the next slide. I just wanted to say a thing about canceling fundraising events, which a lot of us are facing right now. And what I would suggest to you is postponing versus canceling. You can definitely have conversations with existing sponsors and ticket buyers about converting their gifts to general operating support. So that messaging looks a little bit like, I know you bought a ticket, we have to postpone this event, we hope to reschedule it soon, but would you consider taking your ticket price and making it a donation to us at this point? A lot of donors are going to say yes to that. A lot of sponsors are going to say yes to that. So think about if that's a strategy that might work for you. And then we've seen a lot of organizations move portions of their events to online events. And now, while I would not say, let's move the whole thing, I don't think anyone wants to spend like 2 hours on a Zoom call watching people talk about organizations and doing it that way. But small bites of stuff might work. So moving a panel discussion to a quick webinar and engaging your audience that way seems to really be working nicely. And then I have one more slide. And then after all of this, do not forget about the most important part of fundraising, which is thanking and stewarding your donors. So think about ways you can delight and surprise your donors in the thank you process. We have the ability using technology to send video messages in email, but handwritten thank you notes always work really well as well. Connect earnestly with people. I've seen a lot of organizations try to position themselves a little bit more as critical services, and it's not landing as well. And the same thing in thanking and stewarding. If you connect earnestly and tell people what their gift means to you, they remember that next time. And as always, make your donors feel like they're part of your team. And that's my advice there. So I know that went fast, but you can reach out to me if you have other questions, and I'll take questions now too.
Thank you, Julie. Really great information on how you're going to pivot and communicate with your donors. Do you have an example of somebody that's just done it really well that you can share?
Well, we're about 20 days into this. So yeah, I mean, I think that I've seen a couple of organizations be very, very good with communications to their donors to say, you know, we've suspended services. Like I think A26LA has started to put some of their stuff online and started to use like connect their volunteers to students via video calls. The organization Defy Ventures, which works with people coming out of the prison system and in the prison system to work on resumes and job hunt and business plans, has moved a lot of their group work into Zoom calls. Of course, we're always on Zoom calls, but has been really good about taking screenshots of those Zoom calls and sending it out to their donors and putting it on social media and saying, we are still working. You know, and that's kind of their message right now. They're not necessarily actively fundraising. They're in that middle group. But just getting the word out that we're still working. And then there's kind of a soft ask too, to continue to support the work. But I think their community likes to see that it's still active.
Definitely. Okay, so let's see. You have a question here. Do you think a video message done by a CEO on a smartphone is a good idea, even if it's not super polished?
Amanda, I love that idea. And I think that if I stood up right now, you see this like blazer, but I'm all sweatpants from the waist down. So I think we're all pretty used to not looking super polished and professional these days. I think the authenticity of it is so lovely. I go for it. I think it would be great.
Thank you. So I know that we didn't get to a lot of questions on it today. We were short on time, but don't worry, we will answer the questions in the notes that will come out. And I want to thank our three speakers today for really just a very informative hour. So thank you guys.